So our guest today is Shane Hutton. Shane is a very creative person in the advertising industry and a former creative director at the firm Leo Burnett and a former partner at the very innovative Boston firm Modernista, which is where I met him. Shane was responsible for the launch of the Hummer in North America and the campaign that reintroduced Cadillac to a younger, more relevant audience, in addition to memorable campaigns for MTV and Budweiser beer. Prior to joining Modernista, Shane was an instrumental creative mind on the now famous Drivers Wanted campaign for Volkswagen. He is co-founder and executive creative director of the LA-based ad agency Arcana Academy, servicing a small list of luxury clients. Arcana, a creative content agency specializing in strategically sound solutions for branding, advertising, and marketing. Mr. Hutton has won the Grand Prix at Cannes, been nominated for an Emmy Award, been recognized by the Effies, Clios, One Show, AICP, D&AD, and the Department of Justice. I'll definitely have a question about that. His work has appeared in over 35 museums around the world. Please join me in welcoming Shane Hutton. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for being here today, and thank you, Professor Thrush, for inviting me to speak. First of all, I'll start off and tell you a little bit about what we do at Arcana Academy. It's an advertising agency, and as such, we solve marketing problems in creative ways designed to excite, engage, or otherwise influence people in a manner that's favorable to our clients' business objectives. Advertising in general, I think, could be described as the synthesis between psychology and design. In most agencies, these two camps exist in a tenuous balance. To the outside world is presented an integrated face, two halves of a happy whole, but behind closed doors, the psychology or strategic camp constantly does battle with the design or the creative camp, and vice versa. That's why in most agencies you'll find whiteboards next to ping pong tables. You'll find Razor scooters parked underneath global calendars. And famously, you'll find surfboards doubling as boardroom tables. All of these are totems of the fight between the strategy camp and the creative camp, between academics and barbarians, between bean counters versus the rock stars, between nerds and jock nerds. Because the reality is, if you're in advertising, you're just a nerd. There's no real other way. So what sets us apart? What makes us different? Well, at Arcana Academy, we have, by trial and error, found a way around a lot of that infighting. We suffer no fiefdoms. We don't integrate departments because we have no departments to integrate. Good ideas, both strategic and creative, can come from anywhere. Yes, we all have defined roles and responsibilities. You can't run a business without that. But we're also all invited to participate and contribute to anybody else's role. Everybody is invited to creative briefings, and everybody is expected to answer the phone if it rings more than 3 times, and that includes me. As for the synthesis of psychology and design, at Arcana Academy, anyone generating strategies is also personally responsible for the creative solutions those strategies inform. If either doesn't work, then neither get approved. That way, nobody can blame failure on anybody else. We succeed together or we fail together. As one student at the academy said, it's us against the world. And that's not an accident. That's how the agency was designed. It's not easy. There's no blueprint for this because I'm not sure anybody else is actually doing it. It's a fluid dynamic, to say the least, but it works. We make our clients money, and we all like working there. So far, so good. Hearing about it's one thing, but to really get a sense for the place, you kind of have to see it. But since Professor Thrush thought 300 plane tickets to Los Angeles would perhaps push the practice of creative accounting into an area that might threaten the ethical standards of Northeastern University, we decided that it might be best to bring the agency to you. So I brought a video instead that gives you a more immersive sense of the place. And this is the kind of video that we might show a prospective new client in a new business pitch to kind of help them to understand how we differ from the average bear. So with that, I'll roll the tape.
So much of this business distills down to taste. That's why this business is so hard. Because taste is a hard thing for business to coexist with. Taste is not very academic. It doesn't always conform to the bottom line. It's a hard thing to describe in a pie chart. Some people don't even understand what it is, but we all need it because it's emotional. It's the most powerful tool we have to sell with. Everything else is meaningless without taste. Taste, especially in a luxury context, is everything. My name is Shane Hutton, and I am co-founder and executive creative director of Arcana Academy.
I'm Lee Walters, co-founder and executive creative director at Arcana Academy. When we started Arcana Academy, we wanted to create a place that reflects the way we work.
To see the agency is to understand our approach to advertising.
It's beautiful, memorable, and impeccable attention to detail.
A place where every thought, breath, and heartbeat is exceptional. And where every point of contact is a microcosm of the whole. So no matter how you first experience us, from our cards to our business materials, our uniforms,
On the web or walking into the agency, you think to yourself, okay, these guys do things a little bit differently.
we didn't set out to make the place about us. That's why we didn't name it after ourselves. We want the agency to be something everyone can feel like they're a part of.
Arcana Academy is more than just a name. It's a concept. Arcana means secrets or mysteries. An academy is a school.
So Arcana Academy is a place for Lee and I to share our secrets and teach our people how to do some of the things we've been fortunate enough to do with our careers. So that everyone here can not only achieve great things for themselves, but also so that we can create world-class advertising for every one of our clients over and over and over again.
Shane and I have worked at both big multinationals like Ogilvy and Mather, Arnold Worldwide, and Leo Burnett.
And also small shops. I was a partner at Modernista for 9 years, and Lee started at Simmons Durham. We've worked both domestically and internationally, and have created some of the most respected advertising ever for some of the biggest brands in the world. Collectively, we've won the Grand Prix at Cannes, been nominated for an Emmy Award, Art Directors Club, One Show, Clio's, Effies, Andes, Addies, AICPs, and we've had our work in over 30 museums around the world. Today, as Arcana Academy, we service a select group of signature clients.
We don't want to be a big agency. We don't want to take over the world. We're independent, entrepreneurial. There's no holding company. There's no one above us to say no.
We're small batch advertising. We want to give our people an excellent quality of life and our clients highly personalized, white glove service that gets them the results they want. So that's what we're about. And if that sounds like what you're about, give us a call, shoot us an email, or better yet, stop by. Our door is always open.
So the video mentions the word taste a lot, and for our purposes here today, feel free to substitute that word with the word design, because ultimately the latter is a reflection of the former. Design is a reflection of taste. So using the 5 pillars of creative problem solving that you're familiar with, empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test, I'll try to codify our process somewhat, which is tricky because it's part science, part art, part experience, and part voodoo. The latter 3 being particularly hard to unpack, but I'll give it a shot. Empathize. The best way to empathize is to not operate in a vacuum. You have to break down the boundaries between your business or your goals and your client's business and view it as one business with one goal. Their problems literally must become your problems, which unfortunately means you actually have to give a shit. In terms of design, you cannot just make something that you think is cool the answer. You must make the answer something you think is cool. I know, very, very zen, right? In other words, you must control your taste to create a solution with a flavor that is palatable to your audience, which may or may not be you. So you are, in a sense, an actor playing a role while you're making something that appeals to the character you're currently in the process of playing. A good advertising portfolio looks like 10 different designers made it. A bad advertising portfolio looks like the same designer designed every page. And this is almost purely a reflection of that designer's ability to empathize and properly play the roles. Some of you may never understand what I just said. Others of you knew it before you even walked into this hall, no doubt. So define, how do you clearly articulate the problem to be solved? In a word, patience. Most clients want all their problems to be solved in one communication. As a partner with them, you have to be patient. In any relationship where you're a partner with someone or something, you have to be patient. Find solutions to every problem one at a time. Then through collaborative effort, rank them in order of importance. And then try to convince your clients to put as few of those into each communication as possible. People on the street don't really care what problems you had and how you solved them. That's not what they want to hear about. They want to be excited, they want to be entertained, and they're busy. You have a very short span of time in which to be interesting. They'll give you a couple of seconds, so don't blow it. Because if you don't blow it, they'll give you all the time you need to say everything that you want. GoPro is a good example of defining problems to be solved. GoPros aren't the easiest cameras in the world to use. They have buttons with multiple functions. They have small black and white displays. The last version didn't even have a monitor function, so you couldn't frame your shot. They require third-party software to edit videos. Do you really think that one communication can solve all of those problems in the mind of the average camera user? Of course not. So how did they define and solve these obvious design flaws? They ignored them. They're smart enough to see that what the camera does right is much more compelling than what the camera does wrong. So their campaign is all about the end result. Beautiful clips of exciting, high-definition lives. To me, this is an amazing example of how to define problems. Reduce them in importance as much as you can. So we'll move into ideate. You've heard this before. The brain is a muscle. If it's tense, you can't push ideas through it. But if you relax it, ideas fall right out. So to promote idea generation at Arcana Academy, we start with an office space that's easy on the mind. It's beautiful, versatile. We have places for community, places for privacy, places for sun, indoor space, outdoor space, places for formality, places for informality, places to lay down, places that are neat and tidy, and places you can make a mess in. All advertising agencies do this. But for us, it's also vitally important to have a space that creates a sense of pride. If you feel important and special when you walk in, you will be important and special once you're inside. That confidence will help you to speak up. And talking is the most important path to solutions. I always say, a quiet room solves no problems. I like conversation, even conversation that's not about the problem you're trying to solve. Thinking is always going on in your mental OS. It's part of your firmware. If you hit a wall, break set, take a walk, watch a video, you'll get back to it when your mind relaxes a little. It's also important to set a time to ideate. Spontaneous brainstorming sessions aren't good. Everybody has to prepare for a brainstorming session in their own way. So you have to give people time to engage their personal rituals before you can expect them to focus in a group. And of course, once brainstorming is over, you have to allow for people to spend time alone in their particular disciplines. Nothing's worse than trying to design something in a room full of people looking over your shoulder, because design is intimately entwined with failure, and people prefer to fail without an audience. And all of this is just one way at it. It's by no means the only way. Again, it's science, art, experience, and voodoo. Prototype. How do you build or implement possible solutions? You know, someone once said to me, thinking of the answer is only half the battle. Recognizing it as the answer is the other half. How many times have you said something in a brainstorming session, you're just blue skying it, and something comes out of your mouth, and somebody else says, "That's it." And you go, "What's it?" You know, I think it's safe to say it's happened to everyone from time to time. The hardest thing I ever learned in this business is how to recognize possible answers. As a creative person, your instinct is to focus on what your answer to the problem would be. How would you solve the brief? As a creative director, however, you can't be worried about how you would solve it. You can't look at ideas and say, is this a solution I would bring to the table? You have to look at ideas and say, is this a solution at all? If the answer is yes, you have a responsibility to your people, your agency, and your client to move that solution forward, even if it's not your taste. Because the truth is, it might not be about you, and you have to be able to deal with that. When you have an answer, even if it's not your answer, you have to build it. To do that, we create design elements that simulate the consumer journey from disengaged to desired action. Every step of the communication chain that the consumer could possibly experience is laid out piece by piece in elements that you can take, be it a TV spot, an outdoor board, a print ad, a web banner, a website, social media posts. It's all laid out to present it to the client so they get a holistic view of it. Whatever form it has to take, and that allows the client to experience what the customer will experience. And for us, that's been the most effective way to do it. So then the big question, test. How do you measure the performance of one solution against another? Well, this in particular is mostly voodoo, especially if there's math involved. If there's a number next to an emotion, that number is suspect. I like to have my designs, my marketing solutions, tested by public opinion in their natural habitat. One-way glass and fluorescent lights do not replicate a natural interaction with an advertisement any more than pandas in the zoo replicate natural interaction with bamboo. As close as it may be, it will never be the same, and how it populates in the culture could be negatively affected. Focus groups are weird places. Computer models and algorithms are even weirder. When you shove a good idea into a sausage machine and nothing but sausage comes out the other side, should anybody be surprised? The most successful ad campaigns I've ever made were never tested. The ones that were tested the hardest became invisible. I kind of view it as releasing a rhesus monkey into the wild after 20 years in a facility with a surrogate mother made of carpet. Don't expect them to do real well. Have you ever had to explain a joke? How funny was it after? It's the same thing. I think an ad agency needs to be responsible for itself. If we tell you to do something and it fails horribly, you won't have to fire me. I'll resign the account. To me, that's the only test that really matters. So with that, I'll say thank you to Professor Thrush and to Northeastern University for inviting me to speak today, and to all of you for your kind attention.
Well, we could start with a conversation about the uniform.
This is my headmaster's jacket. Only it turns out it's not mine. I grabbed my partner Lee's jacket on the way out of the office, and he's a much larger man than I in both mind and body. So I'm working the disheveled genius look, where I don't care about such trivialities.
Of course.
And herringbone finery.
And we have agreed to speak in the same vocal manner as your 1880s inspired office space. So we will be speaking with British accents for the rest of the
Indeed.
time. No. Well, I guess I'll start with, we really have two kinds of guests in this class. The kind who are really great designers without necessarily knowing it. They might have thought, I'm a structural engineer, or I do this other thing, and you're asking me to reflect on how I make decisions. And I guess now that you pointed out, yeah, maybe they are kind of design related. But you and Karen Kaplan and some other characters that we've had are the second kind of guest, who actually very much in the foreground think about these five issues that sort of form the backbone of the course. So I guess for the students, I think it's important for us to understand that we can talk much more about process than we can with you than we can with a lot of guests. Sure. Because it's not foregrounded so much for them.
Right.
So I want to start with
it's a terrifying thing. Process.
Yes.
It's a terrifying thing for an artist to apply rules to themselves. It's counterintuitive. Art is about breaking rules. It's not about having rules. There are no rules. That's the whole point. That's why I paint. It's a blank canvas, right? But it's not dangerous, and it's not taboo, and it's not going to hurt your creative output if you understand the rituals that you have that allow you to be creative, that allow you to express yourself. Those rituals are very important, and the best people know exactly what those rituals are.
Right. Well, and I would think that very distinction is extremely different when you're talking about yourself as an individual creative person or artist, and having to have an agency where you are implicitly going to, or explicitly going to be able to repeat the creative success again and again, at which point I have to communicate it to young people, I have to colleagues, partners, so I have to be more explicit then, no?
Yes, you have to have enough structure to give people a frame so that they can compose within that frame. say, paint me something, and you don't give me a size of the canvas, it's very difficult for me to design because I don't know what my edges are. I don't know what my frame is, so I cannot balance the frame.
Right.
So you have to have enough structure to provide that frame, but it needs to be, we always say, the structure has to be tight enough to drive a truck through. You know, you don't want it to be so confining that it's debilitating.
Right. So prescriptive.
You don't want it to be prescriptive, like you have to do this, and this is at 4 o'clock, we're going to do that.
Right.
It's much more, give me some guideposts to hit, but don't tell me how to hit them.
Yep.
And I'll figure out a way at it that hits that guidepost. And that's one of the things that creates tension between the strategy department and the creative department in a lot of agencies is the strategy department ends up being a frame that the creative don't like.
Right.
And they say, well, you know what, I can come at this solution from another vector. And a lot of time that other vector doesn't fit this strategy that's been, very theoretically neat and tidy laid out. And it is true, it is academic. It does check all the boxes. It does it looks good on paper kind of thing.
Right.
But sometimes when you execute against that, it's too narrow. It's right, but it's too narrow, or there's a whole nother way at it that the strategy department didn't think of. And you gotta have the strategic ability to backfill a solution that came about through a non-codified means. You have to be able to then post-codify.
Yeah, well, in architecture, we often talk about post-rationalizing
That's
decisions.
right. Yeah, exactly.
But it's really timely that you're here because our last guest was a guy named Bert Spector, who is a professor in our business school, focusing on strategy, business strategy.
Right.
He's not in advertising.
No.
Business strategy. So
Right.
the idea that or a variant of that
Right.
is one side of most advertising agencies, because at the end of the day, the problem to be solved is to increase our sales or introduce a new thing that people don't know they need yet, or I'm sure lots of other things, but
Nobody ever has one master.
yeah. That whole notion of design as a synthetic process, synthesizing solutions to different problems, maybe imperfect solutions to different problems, but optimizing
Right.
the whole thing. Let's try to get. We sort of started at the general, and I want to bring us right into the specific for one thing, because I'm fascinated with this, and I know how it goes with architects when you first meet a client, and you come to me and you say, George, I saw this great picture in House and Garden magazine, and my wife and I have always wanted to have a house that looks like this. Will you design this for me?
Right.
And I, at that point, do not have any idea other than what has just come out of their mouth.
Right.
I do not understand, is this your dream house after years of raising your kids and running chores? You now want to realize the idol that is to be your marital home? Or is there something else? Was there a cheap piece of land or whatever?
Right.
When a client comes into your office for the first time, not a client you've had before, and I know a lot of your business, I'm sure, comes from repeat clients and so forth, but how does that go? What is the first meeting like?
The first meeting is usually, let's say that we've sold ourselves to them at some point in the past, and now we're actually engaging in business with them, and they're going to now let us see a peek behind the curtain. The first meeting is usually them describing what they think is either broken or can be improved.
This is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, and very often they're right. Almost an equal number of times they're maybe not right. So then we get into one of the first steps is you tell us what's wrong. Tell us what your goal is. That's the hardest thing to make them do. Is just don't tell me what to fix. Just tell me what your goal is.
Usually,
I'll figure out what to fix and not fix to get there.
That's right.
You know what I mean? Tell me what you want.
Right.
I had one client said beautifully. Samsung said to me, we went through the days of meetings in Korea, like PowerPoints and pie charts about nothing and whatever. It's completely ridiculous. And at the end of it, I just said, what do you want to this Korean woman? And it's most of the heads of business in Korea are women, oddly. Because the men, I guess, go to the military a lot, and it leaves women running the business. And then, so you get up really, really high-powered executives, one step below Jedi level. You know, you hear a lot about these dudes in Korea that you'll never meet in a million years. It's like, you know, like Chairman Lee, you'll never meet him. It's like, there he is in a helicopter. That's as close as you're ever going to get to the dude. But the people that you can actually talk to, very largely are women. And this woman was so distraught. I could tell she was very passionate about Samsung, and she really wanted to you know, get this meeting on the right track. It was a big global meeting, whatever. So I just said to her, you know, what do you want? She said, I want Samsung to be a loved brand. Great. That's awesome. That's the best brief ever.
Right,
you know,
right.
Don't worry about how we're going to do that.
Right.
You know, it's easy to get there if that's really your goal.
Right.
So getting them to state what their goal is tricky. And then, of course, you look at the market. And, you know, my number one issue with commercials that I think just blow are, you know, who are you talking to?
Right.
Who's your audience?
Right.
It's a fun little experiment. You guys can, you know, go home and watch TV tonight and try this. Take a look at a commercial and ask yourself, who are they talking to? And I bet you 60% of those commercials, you cannot identify who they're talking to. And they probably don't know either. They think they do, but they're really talking to themselves.
Right.
60% of TV commercials are filmed brochures.
Yeah.
That's not a concept. That's not an effective ad.
Right.
That's just you blathering on about how interesting you are.
I always tried to figure out, I used to tell my son that if he was curious who the TV show he was watching was targeted to.
Look at the commercials.
Look at the commercials.
Right.
And
apparently it's for schizophrenics.
Yeah, it's hilarious.
Because the commercials are so crazy. They're talking.
And you find sometimes, for example, oh my gosh, this children's cartoon is clearly watched 90% by adults. That's interesting.
Right. Right, because it's all car commercials in there.
Yeah, exactly.
SpongeBob SquarePants.
Erectile dysfunction. And you're thinking, that's unusual. Anyway.
Daddy, what's an erection?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Let's just change the channel, honey.
Yeah.
Okay. Nevertheless, I think this whole business about, and by the way, that is truly an entertaining thing to do, is to reverse engineer what you're watching and its connection to the ads, because those aren't usually a mistake.
No.
A lot of money's being spent here.
Oh, yeah.
The mistakes are the entertaining ones, like when they finally get around to putting the public service announcement on about how school's out and you need to start watching for children in the street, and it goes on in October. You know,
right. 30 days they were in grave danger and no one cared, but October suddenly we don't want to hit them.
Allora. So this idea about what I would infer from what you just said about that first meeting is when clients want to use your ability to help them define the problem,
right,
it's much better. When they come to you with a detailed equivalent of the house and garden photograph of the finished product, like, do they sometimes come to you with, I'm sure they do. We saw that Dodge Chargers have this great new ad campaign. I think we at Smart Car would really like something like this.
Oh, yeah.
And you say, well, so how does that conversation go because you can't alienate them, you can't say that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, but how do you get them to kind of think more broadly about what the objective of their campaign will be and how you might be able to address it?
Yeah, sometimes you just have to, again, it boils down to patience. You just gotta hold their hand, walk the walk they want you to walk, point out things along the way that are dangerous or stumbling blocks, and hopefully they come to the realization that maybe some of the thinking that they had done might have a fundamental flaw in it. And also, I think there's a desire on the part of everyone to stand out and be an individual. So, and that happens with brands as well. A brand might look to another brand as you know, the enemy. It's nice to have an enemy to focus on. It's good to focus your rage on something, you know.
Like Samsung on Apple.
Exactly, like Samsung on Apple, which is fine as an exercise. But seeing as you bring up that point, technically, it could be argued that Apple is not a competitor of Samsung at all. Now, Samsung probably won't view the world that way, but the fact is, you're talking about two completely different OSs. You're talking about Apple iOS and you're talking about Android. And I'm not sure that the decision at the consumer level is iOS versus Android. I'm not sure.
Android? It's maybe HTC versus.
Right. A strategy that Samsung could employ, one that I had suggested to them at one point in time, was don't worry about Apple. It's a closed system.
Right.
Apple people are Apple people, and it's like 4% of the computer market or whatever. There's a limit to how many iPhones are going to be out there, naturally by the size of their ecosystem. Another way to focus could be, if you want, to make Samsung the best Android experience out there. So that will take out everybody else. Make it a hardware story, not a software story. And don't try to drive your car straight by looking in the side mirrors to see where Apple is at.
That's so interesting.
They kind of did a mix of those two things.
Well, you are the best person ever to ask this question to. Or I just want your thoughts about it, because I've said, I think in this class, and certainly to a lot of my colleagues, that I think one of the best, funniest, and effective ads I've ever seen was a Samsung ad a couple of years ago that I'm sure you're aware of, where the young hip guy is standing in what appears to be a line at the Apple store, but he's holding a Samsung phone, and so people are asking him in line, well, so you're not very happy with, they're assuming he's in line to replace his Samsung phone.
Right.
And no, he's not. He sings its virtues, and no, it does all these things that yours doesn't do. And then, you know how it ends. Then the parents, my age, come over, and it's clear that he's just been holding their place in line, and that the Apple is really for the old people, and that the Samsung is for the young hip people, and it's like incredible jujitsu right there on screen, and it doesn't have to say any of what I just said, but every young person who's watching it, I think, I don't know, I wasn't young at the time, but I think every young person watching it going, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm much more like the Samsung guy.
Yeah.
But you're saying that might have been fine, even though I think it was a good ad, it might have been pursuant to the wrong strategy, which is taking on Apple.
Well, yes and no. It depends on how directly you want to execute against a strategy. Let's say that I wanted to execute directly against a strategy, then I would ignore Apple. It wouldn't appear in my ads anywhere and whatever. If you want to execute indirectly against a strategy, which I think that did, is by saying Samsung is as good as Apple, you are by default saying it's the best Android machine out there, because the perception is that Apple is the king.
It's the gold standard.
It's the gold standard. So if Samsung is as good as Apple, then I'm basically getting an iPhone and I don't have to switch to iOS. So there is a strategic component against other Androids by doing that. It's just a one step down.
It's what would have once been called the Cadillac of Android phones.
Yes.
With that as my segue. Let's talk about, you were involved in something that had been attempted, I would say, just as a consumer, for 30 years. Which was to take Cadillac cars, which when I was a kid really were the best American cars by a long shot. And in fact, brief note, I briefly owned a gold 1963 Cadillac hearse.
Nice.
Oh my God, it was the coolest thing. It had a gigantic 429 engine in it. But that was when, as it happened, since it was like 27 feet long, it was kind of hard to park. So it really wasn't a good urban car. But what was interesting is it was from that era where there was a Cadillac of carburetors. General Motors made the Cadillac carburetor, which was way better than the Oldsmobile or the Chevrolet carburetor. It had a window.
Which would be a rule at GM, by the way.
Yeah.
That would be a hard, fast design rule at GM, is nothing can have a better anything than a Cadillac.
Which is, so in other words, it wasn't just rhetoric, it wasn't just advertising effectiveness, but there was delivery behind that Cadillac message. Then entered the oil crisis in the 70s and malaise, And
And they did that diesel version of the chop back Cadillac with that smoked.
yeah, so there
Not-
were
not
aesthetic
good.
problems, there were operational problems. So by the time we go through the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, it's just a
What are you doing?
fiasco.
Yeah, what are you doing?
They're just not, why do you even have Cadillac?
Right.
And then, so pick up the story from there. You guys are hired at Modernista.
Yeah, we were hired to refresh Cadillac. I think it was 2004 or 5, I want to say, and we had to define really who's buying them. And this is the same process applied. Suddenly, you look at the problem. You know, we have declining sales. The average Cadillac driver is 65 years plus.
Right.
You want a Cadillac to be the last car you ever own,
Right.
but you don't want it to be because you're 65 and you're going to die soon. You know what I mean? So we had to bring that number down to a...
Last car you ever owned, not pre-death.
Right, yeah. You don't want that to be not your choice. So we wanted to get the buyer down to that 30-something sweet spot. But first we had to figure out what Cadillac stood for. And what we came up with was not something that GM really wanted to hear at the time. A lot of people at GM didn't want to hear it. We defined Cadillac as, it was, now there are certain words that they like. It's for self-made people. Cadillac is not generally people born into daddy's money. They don't run out and rock a Cadillac unless they're, interestingly enough, first generation children of immigrants. So if your family came from Cuba or whatever and you're living in Miami, and when you graduate university and you get a job, you want a Cadillac because that symbolizes having made it in America, which your family is going to be totally cool with and proud of you and all that stuff. And that's very important. The other side of the fence was people who were self-made people, people that did things their own way. A lot of Cadillac drivers have, we called it a light blue collar. They themselves might not be a plumber right now, but their dad was a plumber. They grew up in that family, and now they own a plumbing company. They're driving Cadillacs. And you know, a lot of people have Cadillac tattoos. You know, they say, I've been in business meetings before where they say, you know, well, what's your goal? What do you want? They say, we want our brand to be something people want to tattoo on their body.
Right.
And it's like, well, interestingly that you say that, because most people say it as a joke, but I've actually worked on brands that people tattoo on their body. In fact, they tattooed the tagline that one guy at least tattooed the tagline that we came up with, which was life, liberty, and the pursuit.
Yeah.
An open-ended pursuit, the pursuit of whatever you want. And he tattooed it on his arms. So when he spread his arms like this, it said life, liberty, and the pursuit on his arms. So don't, you know, no one can tell me that wasn't an effective, meaningful thing to him. So we strategically kind of came at it from that point of view. And then we put together a series of ads that had the look of a luxury car commercial, but they were just absolutely taking a piss on all the modern sort of thinking around luxury. Like famously, there was one with Kate Walsh from Grey's Anatomy, later Private Practice. Now she's in a new one. Super nice person, by the way. No celebrity ego at all. She's just awesome to work with. And she says, you know, in today's luxury game, it's not about Hollywood accents and pop-up nav screens and blah, 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 and lists a laundry list of standard features on a Cadillac. She goes, it's not really about any of that. The real question is, when you turn your car on, does it return the favor? And that just kind of took the wind out of all of the other people's commercials where they're talking about this standard and this standard and this standard. All of a sudden, it's like none of that mattered. It's like, you know, speaking of 4-hour erections, does the car, you know, turn you on? That's really the real reason why people buy luxury, and that's true.
There was a male version of that campaign that said, when you put your foot on the accelerator, does it respond or something like that? Am I wrong?
Well, no, you're not wrong. You may be referring to, you may be remembering an action as a dialogue, but I think what the guy was saying is he's saying, you know, life is high school with money.
What are the cool kids wearing? Where are the cool kids living? What are the cool kids driving?
Right.
And he says, you know what I think? I think it's time to graduate. And he stands on the gas and he blasts through the tunnel.
Okay.
Same kind of deal. Same strategy, different execution.
Yeah.
Where it's not really about all of the group behavior. Cadillac was viewed as a rebellious purchase.
Right.
It was a luxury purchase, but it was counterculture in some sense because.
Well, now the standard one, now the conservative choice was Audi, BMW,
Right.
Mercedes.
Right.
Right. Okay.
And then Cadillac had sort of a hard scrabble, pull itself up by its bootstraps few decades, and that sensibility could easily be translated into the people that buy it. They saw camaraderie with that.
How connected? This is really interesting, and especially around design when it comes to cars.
Sure.
How engaged were you or your colleagues with the design, the automotive design decisions and sort of aesthetic or rhetorical choices that Cadillac was making during this time? In other words, not involved at all,
right.
and we just responded to things they chose to do.
Mm-hmm.
Surely there must have been some, when it comes to marketing and design and branding and advertising, I'm just curious because I don't know about how that interacts. Like, if there is a thing that evokes a particularly powerful emotional response that you guys latch onto in the advertising agency, do you say, that smoke, just for example, that smoked window changes completely how people perceive this car, in a good way or a bad way? Does that get passed on to Cadillac?
In a sense, at the time, the head of GM Design was a really inclusive man named Clay Dean. He was the head of their design department. And he invited the agency to see how the car was being designed through every stage of the design process. And they had, one of the things they were working on hard at the time was getting the interiors up to snuff.
Right.
Because in their design center they had the pictures of the enemy, right?
Right.
They had the Mercedes interior and the Audi interior, and they were really
And it's
pushing.
the real touch point. It's actually where you physically engage the car.
It was, yeah. They had what you call ducks, or bucks actually, rather, not ducks, bucks with a B, where they have cars cut in half and they have different things, so you can get in there and see what it all is about. And the design center, the interior design area was at least as big as this auditorium. And pretty massive workspace. They had various different stages of things. Really interesting. But he took us through the entire holistic design of the car, and they got their game pretty tight over there. They kind of know what they need to do, and where we had influence was how we dress the car in the ads, because we could use upgraded parts, and we could put upgraded rims, and we could put nothing aftermarket, but we would say, Clay, we really need bigger rims, and we really need. Do these windows, do these tail lights come smoked from the factory? Is that an option that's available? We would go through in the fine print of all the available options, even some that weren't that popular. What they very often want to do is they want to feature in the ad a popularly equipped. And sometimes the 20-inch rims aren't the most popular rims, so it's only 18-inch rims that are in the ad. But they were very open with us about how to sex that car up a little bit from a design point of view, in terms of what to put on it, and how to photograph that in a way that was really the most visceral.
Before I go on to the next thing, I do want to say that my son, who is obsessed with cars, and I watch the car ads a lot on television, and we've gotten to the point now where almost every automobile ad in the United States, you know what it says at the bottom. Close course.
Do not attempt.
Don't attempt anything that we're showing. Anything.
Right.
And what I liked about the Cadillac ads is, I don't remember if maybe they have to say this for everything, but it was about somebody driving a car, which you are actually allowed to do. And I thought, well, that's interesting. That's refreshing.
Yeah. Well, we're very strict on shoots. You cannot drive the car more than 25 miles an hour or something like that.
Right.
Which a lot of people I think that was a 25-mile-an-hour pass, right?
Right,
It's
right.
like, you know,
No,
I'm not going to say if it was or wasn't 25 miles an hour, but it looked like 25 miles an hour. But you know, and so we ended up streaking things to create this feeling of speed. So we were sort of legally compliant, but we had that feeling.
Oh, is there a law about that?
Oh yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. You cannot do like a 90-mile-an-hour pass on the highway.
Right.
Just to
Well, that's
show
why
your
they
car
sometimes do them at the Bonneville Salt Flats.
That's right,
Because
because then you're on a closed course.
Yeah.
We were on the road, which is still technically closed when you're filming,
Right.
but anything that looks like dangerous driving, they're super sensitive about.
Well, so therefore, you all probably know the ad I'm going to remark about that's in circulation right now. I don't even remember who it's for, maybe Honda or something, or Dodge or something. The car jumps up in the air, lands on top of a commuter train, which it takes, and then it gets off of it says, at first it says closed course, don't attempt. Then it says obvious fantasy.
Right.
Cars don't fly. You
Right.
cannot land them on trains.
Right,
Then the apology starts to get book-length,
Yeah, really ridiculous. Yeah, it's a trick that
which actually causes me to pay slightly more attention.
Yeah, it's a trick that's used occasionally where you play with the legal type, and it's fun to do.
Right,
But in that case, they call certain things are considered fantasy, so it's okay. But for example, with Hummer, when we were shooting in New Zealand once, and we lifted the front wheel, we were going over some boulders, and we lifted the front wheel up off the ground, and they were like, "No, you can't do that." We're like, "What are you talking about? I just saw a kid do like a loop-de-loop. He stole his dad's car and did like a loop-de-loop in it. How is that cool? But we can't lift it." And that's why.
It was a
'cause
distinction
that was
between-
obvious fantasy, and
Right,
ours
right.
wasn't.
Well, actually, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about Hummer because I remember that campaign very well. These guys won't, but because we didn't see it in television, I do nonetheless have a very specific question about, in a way, let's say, art versus design, or say strategy versus design. Art, in my coupling, being where the artist does what he or she wants to do, and the designer responds to a problem that is generated by somebody else.
Right.
Okay, so like in architecture school, I'm very clear that we are a design school and not an art school.
Right.
Job one is understanding that.
As soon as you have a client.
That's why empathy is so, an artist
Yeah.
doesn't have to be empathetic, Artists can be disdainful of, it can be.
Well, it depends. I mean, people often cite, great master works, like the Sistine Chapel,
Right.
But when people don't think of Michelangelo as a commercial artist.
Oh, but he worked on commissions.
Yeah, he worked on commission, and also if he screwed it up, he may have been killed.
Right,
there
right.
was a lot on the line.
There was that.
But if you look very carefully on the roof of the Sistine Chapel, a couple panels away from the creation of Adam and one up, there's clearly a picture of a dude hanging a mooner. I've photographed it myself. I saw it myself in my own photograph. So there are ways to express yourself within a work and not have the client notice or care.
Fair enough. I would say that like artists like Van Gogh or something like that truly just, yes, later their paintings sold for a lot of money, but at the time, even at the time, they didn't. And so he's as close to the other end. Let's say it's a continuum, but he's as close to the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah, absolutely. He's just painting for the love of it.
But now,
or the cathartic nature of it. I'm not totally sure which.
Yeah. And then maybe we as a culture later, oftentimes generations later, ascribe significant cultural value to this thing that our forebears held in total disdain.
Right. Well, once you find out whenever someone's pained, we like it.
Yes.
We like to see people go through things that we do not want to personally go through.
When they're pained.
So we can learn about it vicariously. So that's.
I wanted to, so about the Hummer campaign. This is really interesting, folks, because, we're talking, the Hummer business is probably late 90s, early 2000s, or is it all early 2000s?
Early 2000s,
Okay.
yeah. 2001 to about 2005, 6.
So, the Hummer, for those of you who don't remember, was just an incredible, the original big honker. H1 Hummer was
full military spec.
Came from the U.S. military and was basically the giant contemporary overkill replacement for the Jeep, the old Willys Jeep.
Yeah.
And so, and I guess they still use the H1 in many variants of it in the military.
It's still in service. Yeah.
But then it came to the domestic market, and right around the time that environmental awareness was once again resurging, and
Yes,
so it was just
exactly.
this crazy thing
Yeah.
where people were being encouraged to purchase this gigantic
Right.
vehicle. Stop me when I say something that is
No,
inaccurate.
please, go ahead.
Gigantic, heavy, gas-guzzling thing with hardly any interior space.
Right.
And that took up almost more than a lane on the highway. It was,
Right.
The Simpsons did a fantastic riff on it called their vehicle was called the Canyonero.
Right.
And they had an advertising campaign and a song and everything. And
Yeah, it was amazing.
Crushes children like nobody's business. Drives over other people's cars.
Right.
Anyway, but so it fell to you guys to make this a desirable purchase for the people who would be a kind of informed demographic about these challenges, but who could afford to buy this thing, which at the time probably cost $80,000 to $100,000.
Yeah, the H1 would be over 100, and then the H2, which was a more civilian-friendly version of the
Right.
H1, was about around 80.
Okay.
Between 50 and 80.
What was so cool about your campaign, and this is a little bit awkward to talk about something that we're not directly looking at, but the whole idea of the Hummer was you could go anywhere. You could go anywhere. There was no terrain that was too forbidding for this thing.
Right.
But the way you guys shot all these ads, I still remember.
Right.
It was a very formalist, I would now say Wes Anderson approach.
Yes.
The vehicle was always dead center
Right.
in the middle of the frame. It never moved, even though the terrain
Right.
was constantly moving and crazy. So the message for me was, the world is an insane, crazy, rocky place, but you are always safely at the center of it in the Hummer.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly right.
That was not a tagline. That was a visual story.
Right.
And I encourage you to, later, go onto YouTube. I'm sure you can YouTube one of those old ads.
Yeah. Hummer H2.
And they're brilliant because they're aesthetically, like, I would say, like they're like video art if you just turn off the sound. Just because you see this fixed thing, and ironically, it's communicating your ability to move and go
anywhere.
Anywhere.
The backgrounds were just changing. So suddenly the truck's driving around and there's glaciers behind, and then the truck won't change, but the background, boom, is like
Desert.
forest, and then boom, a desert, and then boom, a rocky moraine in Iceland or something.
Right.
And it created this sense of you can go anywhere, but the truck was a very solid, constant visual mnemonic that carried you through the spot, for sure.
I think that's a really good lesson, especially for those of you who are not explicitly studying design, is, you might say, I took this course understanding design, it was okay. I was on Facebook in the lecture hall most of the time, but it wasn't that bad. And there are lessons like this one that understanding and critically thinking about an advertisement like the Hummer ad will reveal some things to you about the role of design in narrative, in storytelling. You are getting the message without reading or hearing any of the words that we were just saying.
Right. I call it coding.
Coding.
You code what you want to say.
Yeah,
You communicate what you want to say. You don't say it.
How did you, you talked about focus groups, and of course all of us know everything we know about advertising from Mad Men. Obviously.
Right.
That goes without saying. But did you, you must have accompanied that, because Hummer was part of GM at that point.
Right.
And that's probably how you got the Cadillac business, because you did well with Hummer, I assume?
Yes, that's correct, yeah.
So they must have done some focus group or some research that they used with you, or?
All we tested was the tagline. And the tagline that floated to the top was "like nothing else."
Yeah.
And I like taglines that are 50% about the product or service and 50% about the people that use it. And the Hummer was certainly like nothing else. And the people that were attracted to that viewed themselves as like nothing else. They were sort of rugged individualists, iconoclastic. That's how they viewed themselves. And so that tagline floated to the top. With that license, think about that. Like nothing else. That tells you what your ads need to look like. That tells you what your ads need to sound like nothing else. If we had a landscape in the background, it had to be
unrecognizable.
Right,
or else
right.
it's off-brand.
Right, right. Touche.
You have to say, where the hell are they?
Right, right.
I've never seen anything
This
like
is
that
not
before.
passing the
Right.
gateway to Yellowstone.
No.
This is
This is the edges of the earth, man.
Right, right.
You know, that's why we shot in New Zealand and Iceland and the Atacama Desert in Chile.
Wow,
You know,
that's
places where it would look so foreign.
right.
It was almost like a National Geographic type.
Well, this is a very
Experience.
analogous, it seems to me, and you correct me if I'm wrong, a very analogous thing to the famous Apple Think Different
Right.
approach, which
Right.
was suddenly we're going to align our brand with the greatest thinkers in world history.
Right.
What?
What?
Gandhi is selling your computers?
What?
How did you get him? I
Yeah.
thought he was dead.
Yeah.
Martin Luther King?
Yeah, what's going on?
What is going on?
Yeah.
And
People
what
loved
is your endorsement budget?
Yeah.
Those guys seem like they'd be even more expensive than, say, Kevin Durant. So last year, Walter Isaacson's biography of Steve Jobs was part of this course, and I decided that it actually, though very relevant, it's not top. It's good general reading for these kinds of issues, and
Yeah.
I have strongly encouraged that people read it just because it's a great book.
Yeah.
And it's also, if you thought anything about Steve Jobs,
Unthink it.
unthinking.
Think
'cause-
different.
Think different,
Yeah.
because he was a mofo. He was not a
rough dude.
not a nice person.
Yeah. He may have been in certain circumstances. It's just he was probably put into a lot of high pressure circumstances where you're there to be everyone's friend or you're there to be effective.
Right.
And he chose effective, I
Right.
think.
And
Famously, a colleague of mine had a meeting with Steve Jobs that lasted under 2 minutes. They were
Wow.
scheduled for 15. And my friend started to speak and sort of laid the groundwork for what point he was about to make, and he was there with a junior colleague of his, and Steve Jobs went, "You stop, you explain what's going on," to the junior, because
Right.
this guy already,
Right.
you're already going to take too
Right.
long, bro. Okay, sum up what your boss is
Right.
saying. Imagine being that
I
kid.
know. Oh my God. Right.
Yeah.
I thought I was carrying Mr. Johnson's coat
Yes,
today, but it
yes.
turns out I'm now pitching for our firm.
Right, exactly.
Very nice. Okay, I wanted to get at a couple more things. When it comes to, this is getting back to our 5 words, and clearly empathy is like the key to
Everything.
everything.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so funny to have a term like that be so associated with human kind of connection that we seldom think of as having anything to do with business or work.
Right, I'm gonna clothe the homeless.
Yes, exactly.
Is
because I'm
really
empathetic.
empathy. Yeah, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, I'm
Or
gonna be empathetic.
if
to
I could
someone
just
trying to sell
rid
paint.
myself of all this empathy, maybe I'd be successful in life.
Right. Change it to apathy. And
Well, as we've already discussed, my favorite condition to help students overcome is intention deficit disorder.
right.
But how do you go about empathizing? Especially, I mean, empathy doesn't really mean anything if I already feel like I'm on the same page with you.
Right.
But let's say I'm a person that is very, very, very unlike Shane Hutton.
Right.
And I come and I want you to be I think maybe I want you guys to work for us. I don't know. I'm going to test you out and see if you're just, some patch-wearing
Right.
hooligan or
Right.
what's going on here?
Right.
So how do you try to empathize with me if I'm, for example, we had a guest earlier who's also done a lot of work with Samsung, Gordon Bruce, helped them like 25 years ago reframe their whole culture around design. And so now they're hiring people like you and my friend Peter Dixon at Profit in New York.
Right.
And, but how do you, especially maybe across cultural lines or across class lines or any other kind of line, how do you go about it? Is there no method to that? Is it a mindset?
Well, I think it is to some degree a mindset. One of the things that we always do a check for if we're going to get into business with someone, we do a chemistry check. You have a chemistry meeting
Right.
to see if I even like that person.
Right.
Because if I don't like that person, I'm not going to be able to empathize with them very well.
Right.
You know, then I'm just in it for the money.
Right.
And there's a word for people who are in relationships for the money, and you don't want to be one.
Right.
You know? So really chemistry is half of it. You have to actually, that's why I said, you know, unfortunately that means you actually have to give a shit.
Right.
You do. You actually have to care about that person as a person, and it really is empathy.
Right,
I mean, you
right.
just look at, you know, let's say your client's a woman. You look at her, and you look at her. Is she stressed out?
Mm-hmm.
Is she wearing nice clothes?
Mm-hmm.
If she's not wearing nice clothes and she's stressed out, she's obviously got other things that she's dedicating her life to, because all of these people make pretty good money.
Mm-hmm.
So you can start to get a code of what this person, everyone encodes their appearance. And so you start to look at that, and then you find out, oh, you know, she's got kids, and she was divorced, and this is really all that she has going right now is this job, and she really needs to make it work. But this guy came in from another office, and he's trying to sort of get his fingerprints on stuff that she's already spent 4 months working on. And he's more of a authority figure. She's the one who actually has the purse strings, so he can't fire you. So you start to realize where you can align and how you can help her as a person to succeed at her job. And sometimes just selling a lot of shit fills in a lot of cracks for people, and they elevate. And sometimes it's not that easy. Sometimes you're in a market maintenance job where, you know, you've maxed out your retail footprint because let's say that your product is exclusively carried by a particular retailer and they're not building any more stores or what have you, and you're in a maintenance mode with them. It's a lot harder to move the needle on sales, so you got to fill in the cracks politically with her. And you just have to really think about, okay, if I was her, what would I need to do to navigate this? So very often we do things that ad agencies don't do. We make clients PowerPoint presentations for them so that when they go into a meeting with their board members or their stockholders meeting, their game is tight. They look good. It looks good. They look like they know what they're doing. We make it really easy for them to sell our work through. So there is a selfish motive in there. But it's a symbiotic relationship, so of course there's a selfish motive in there.
This is very clarifying. You just said, okay, well, if we can't empathize with the people personally at all, I mean, if we just don't like them, then that's probably not somebody we want to work with. Okay, I get that. But there's another slice of this, which is what happens if I'm a really affable guy and you really like me and I've just taken over the NRA or tar sands in Alberta, Canada, or something I'm going to speculate is not maybe your favorite political cause. How does that shake out? Do you not take those things? Or I've got a huge we need to get more guns in the hands of 8-year-olds campaign. And it's going to pay big money, okay? We don't think children have enough access to guns. That's what my position is. And I have a $200 million, you know, advertising campaign that I want to do. Can you guys be the people really help America understand that we don't have enough guns in the hands of children?
Yeah, I can't be.
You can't be.
You know, I can't be. Some agencies can be. You know, there are agencies out there that are selling products that hurt people. I just can't.
So how about Mr. Draper? How about cigarettes?
There are.
We're going to get him on this, okay?
Yeah.
Let's just be clear. There's not going to be any escape here.
No. Well, let's say that I was like, okay, I personally don't smoke, but some people do, and it's a choice that people make. And this day and age,
the risks are known.
The risks are known. Alcohol is also,
Right.
very damaging on like 23 of your body's different systems.
Right.
It's not good stuff. It's complete poison. But we sell that,
Right.
and that we have a clean conscience about that.
Okay.
Mostly because when you sip alcohol, it doesn't offend other people around you. Cigarette smoking offends other people around you. So
Well, and harms them, not just offends
yeah,
them.
and it harms them. So there's another component to that that you have to take into consideration with something like that. But at least today, cigarettes don't claim any health benefits.
That's right. That's
You
right.
know,
So you draw the line between
I might,
deception.
yes. Oh, absolutely.
And
Yes.
I mean, so
Forthrightness is critical.
right.
And I would draw the line on deception. I mean, I've had this idea for a website for a long time that I've never done anything with. That it's medicineorpoison.com, and all it is the side effects
Right.
of what happens when you ingest various things.
Right.
And it could be medicine,
Right.
or it could be poison.
Right.
This particular one causes blindness, dementia, testicular shriveling, shortness of breath, and possible death.
Right.
Is it medicine or poison?
Right.
You would probably be wrong a lot.
Right. Well,
That's either an Alzheimer's medication or it's
crack.
brake fluid. I don't know. The side effects are very similar at a certain point. But that's sold as medicine.
Right.
Now, I'm not saying I wouldn't, I wouldn't at least talk to a big pharma client. I'm just saying that in this day and age, you got to be careful about what it is. How would you feel if you were selling medicine?
Right.
And you're going to help people. I'm going to sell medicine. Right. And then the medicine that you sold has been recalled because it caused some horrible thalidomide-like effect that no one anticipated.
Right.
That'd be a tough thing to reconcile. Right. So you have to ask yourself as an agency, do you want really any part of that?
Right.
Or are you willing to take a little bit of that, depending on what it is, and do it on a case-by-case basis, or are you all in for that?
Yeah.
Because there's some agencies that are just big
that's
pharmacy agencies.
That's actually, you're right. That is the playing field for the most ethical controversy, I guess, today, is probably the pharmaceutical industry. Because on the one hand, the promise of fixing things has never been great.
It's great.
But as my son and I also do when watching television, you might think that's all we do, but we do have some books too, I want to be clear about that, is to turn the sound down on the television when one of these pharma ads is on for a drug they're trying to get you to make the decision about purchasing instead of your doctor. Talk to your doctor about taking this fourth-ranked
right, which is really
heart medication.
Yeah, it's really an odd thing, to go into your doctor and say, you know what, I would like to talk to you about trimapazole. And they go, that is for complications that come about from hysterectomy.
For hysterectomies, and to my knowledge, you do not
So I probably won't need that then.
Right.
But there are people out there that are like that. They're wired like that. And that's not even the ad agency's fault necessarily if that person gets really excited about that ad and goes in there because they're kind of a hypochondriac
well, but the
type.
ads in pharma now, it seems to me, are the purpose of the ads is actually, to get back to this issue, is actually deception. Because if you left it up to the so-called free market, the free market is what your doctor would prescribe for you. You don't. I don't go in and say, I'm predisposed to talk about whether or not my femur is broken. Well, well, it's not, so it's going to be a short conversation. My point is, we're the free market of healthcare presumably is that you listen to the professional about this, as opposed to coming up with your own web-based research. Although I guess a lot of people do that as well. Yeah. But the point is that the ads are about saying that this is doing something perhaps that it's not. That, for example, that it is the most successful drug for X, Y, or Z, and in fact, that's never what they're talking about. They're lifestyle ads, just like car ads. They show people having fun in the backyard at a candlelit dinner.
Rowing kayaks and doing all sorts of amazing things because now they don't have to urinate every 20 minutes, which is probably true. But there's always ethical challenges with any. I mean, you could have an ethical challenge in another thing. I don't want to beat up specifically one industry, big pharma. You could have an ethical challenge with something as simple as the product that you're being asked to advertise. It just has ridiculously excessive packaging.
Right.
And that's just the way they go about it. That's just how they make it.
Well,
So you might be able to influence something like that. As an ad agency, you might be able to say, you ever thought about stripping down the packaging on this bad boy?
Right.
But sometimes that's just that's their thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky. This whole interest, I mean, I think students are often very interested at the intersection of business and ethics. Because, we like to imagine ourselves when we're in our college years as being among the most ethical human beings on the planet. In retrospect, I certainly thought that of myself in the late 70s and early 80s. A review of the facts would reveal slightly different outcomes.
Right.
But
here's a photograph.
Here's the assertions, and then here's the actions. But our last guest, Bert Spector, the business strategist, talked about how you have to really understand your audience. And he said, for example, Abercrombie & Fitch is not marketing me. Bert Spector is 60 years old.
Right.
Has been teaching for a long time. He says, they don't even want me in their stores.
Right.
Okay? The stores are really dark. It's impossible for someone to, the prices or the information is written in faint ink on brown paper that nothing can be seen. But that's not the ethical thing I wanted to raise. I think it's that, if it's not Abercrombie & Fitch, it's another one of these, related brands that has come under fire in the last year or two about having only comparatively tiny sizes. In other words, we don't want anyone who's average weight or, God help us, overweight, even in our store.
Yeah.
We certainly don't want them wearing our clothes because they were asked, why don't they give away their excess capacity? Why do they burn their excess clothing instead of giving it to the homeless? They said, we don't want homeless people wearing our clothes.
No.
I'm not sure. In public, CEO said this.
Yeah.
And then he doubled down and he said, and we don't want unattractive people of any kind, by any measure, wearing our clothes. And I thought, how is there some software you use to gain entry to the store?
Yeah.
A BMI index maybe, or something like this. What I'm getting at is, that might seem kind of innocuous. This is another kind of ethical challenge.
Right.
They're not doing it, they're not causing pollution.
Right.
They're not causing violence to anybody, not physical violence.
Right.
But some people would say, that's just repulsive.
It's hurtful.
It's hurtful
to society as a whole.
To society, to individuals.
Yeah. How do you reconcile that? I mean.
But if you sell stylish clothing, you are selling sex. You are selling. So how? I mean, surely there are things that you guys do sell and have no qualms about selling.
Right.
Do you have? I'm just curious. Do you have conversations about these issues at all?
Yeah, we do, and I have a really super dead simple golden rule for that served me well, and I encourage anyone to use it, whether in business or in life, whether it's part of your free time. For me, it started out as a guidepost for going to parties, because I didn't want to go to too many parties, especially when I was in college. And it's a really simple mantra that I've kept my entire life, and it serves me well in business as well. And it's very simply, don't do anything that you wouldn't do. So it sounds very circular and it sounds very ridiculous, right? But I'm telling you, repeat that mantra to yourself. Don't do anything that you wouldn't do.
Right.
And if you know yourself and you're comfortable with yourself and you're comfortable with who you are, you will be your own best judge to not get yourself into something that's not you.
Right.
So you don't get that photograph that 25 years later haunts you.
Right.
Don't do anything you wouldn't do.
Right.
And so sometimes we sit down and we have conversations like that. And that's the filter that I usually push the conversation through. That's the lens I use to focus the conversation is this violating anything that I would do?
Right.
If my parents, because my parents watch TV like anyone.
Right.
And if my parents see this, are they going to go like, what are you doing?
Yeah. What kind of a monster did we raise?
Right. And it's a nice sort of North Star to navigate your behavior by.
Right. Well, I think that's pretty good. I mean, I think about a clothing line that has been beset. The problems were probably associated just with the one person. I think you know what I'm going to say, which is American Apparel.
Right.
They had this one guy who was kind of their founder. I think his name is Dov Cheney, maybe, or.
I don't know his name, but yeah, he's notorious.
He's now out.
He's
now
notorious,
been
yeah.
Ousted, but
Because he was getting fresh, I guess.
Yes.
Or accused of getting
Well,
fresh.
and then
You never know.
well, we don't know, but we do know that was also the message, in a way, of the clothing, right? Which is the message of all clothing for that age group. But
that in particular clothing.
It was particularly that way. Anyway,
Yeah.
it's interesting. Maybe we should. I'm sure we have some questions via Twitter. This is just how hip we are, by the way, as an aside.
Nice.
We have the student questions coming via Twitter.
Real time.
But that has sapped the will to come up to the microphones, which I.
Someone probably tweeted from in here. They
Yeah.
just don't want to talk.
No, they did tweet from in here. That's the whole thing. Is they
Yeah.
can do it very surreptitiously,
Yeah.
and it looks like they're just posting
random.
on Facebook.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
You've created a distinct image for your company with your logo, uniforms, and even your business cards. Is this to give potential clients an idea of the work you will do for them? Or if not, how do you present a different perspective of your work at a glance?
Yeah, that's a good question. We did it intentionally to show, to demonstrate through our actions, not our words. You know, I'm the kind of general, I like to lead from the front. I don't ask my soldiers to do anything that I don't do.
Right.
And I wouldn't want to tell my clients, look, this is going to be good for your business, but I don't personally use it in my business, but your business is going to be. So we definitely designed the company from the ground up so that every touch point was consistently on brand for us. And we say famously when we go into meetings, if you can't trust an agent, if an agency can't brand themselves, how can you trust them to brand you?
That is such a good answer, by the way, and it's so different than most agencies. I don't, you know more of them than I do, but you know, they actually brand them, if you go to their headquarters, they brand themselves simply as modern and sleek.
Right.
I mean, in other words, if I asked you,
We're in the know.
Yeah,
because we have an office that looks
tasteful,
like this, yeah.
and we have Gensler designed our offices, and aren't they cool?
Yeah. But our business cards from our executive floor don't totally match our business cards from our creative floor. There's slight differences in the type and font. It's like, really? Are you guys talking to each other here?
Wow. Yeah. But whereas this is it's so rhetorically over the top.
Right.
I love that. By the way, we were talking before the class about.
And the uniforms aren't mandatory, by the way. But people.
I wish they were. But
people tend to wear them because they now have a sense of identity from doing so.
Right.
Whereas they would have normally had a sense of identity by not doing so. But you go to a place where people are wearing Converse shoes and jean shorts and ironic T-shirts with Darth Vader trimming a topiary Death Star. You can only see that so many times before you want something else.
No, I know what you mean. I know what you mean. You've just described, metaphorically anyway, the career of Frank Gehry.
Right.
Sorry, I digress. Okay, let's try another?
How did you transform your idea of Arcana into a successful agency?
I'll let you know when I'm done doing that. I think you just have to, it's the Nike thing. You got to just do it. You just say, well, I'm either gonna succeed on my own terms or I'm gonna fail on my own terms. And there's varying definitions of successful, obviously, but we wanted to do this our way and prove that it works. And I think it's a difficult thing that I kind of stutter through the question, because it really is an agency that's not for everyone. It's not really for not every client is going to look there and go, A lot of clients just go, well, that's all they know how to make is fancy Victorian shit.
Right.
And my brand isn't a fancy Victorian brand, so they're
not getting it.
They're not going to get me because they look like that, which is completely absurd because you go into some other agencies that are cube farms with polyurethane Japanese toys all over the place. That doesn't mean they're just going to make you look like a generic ad with a Japanese toy in the bottom corner. That's not really somehow that
they're able to see the flexibility in that context, but not in yours.
Right, because there's no direct directly reflected point of view in the agency aesthetic there.
Right,
It looks like every other agency, it's normal.
Right, right.
Then you see an agency that has a very strict aesthetic point of view.
Right.
And they go, well, that's not normal, therefore that's all that they can do. It's all that they can do.
Right, right.
Which is not the case. So it is tough. You have to go into meetings, and this also answers the B part of the original Twitter question. You have to go into meetings and prove to clients that you're not only going to give them you're not going to come out looking just
Right,
exactly
right,
like us.
right.
You know, we have flexibility, and you know, I always say advertising is like being asked to dance a ballet in a phone booth.
Uh-huh.
You got this much space, and you got to make it look pretty in there. And a lot of clients see our vibe, and they go, well, they're not going to be able to do that. Right. So you have to go into meetings, you have to prove it. I feel like I'm always proving myself to everyone these days.
Yeah. Let me, you know, it raises the question, you described two different kinds of work, I'm sure there are more kinds, about, let's say, expanding sales or creating new markets versus maintenance.
Right.
I imagine your firm is asked to do maintenance very little.
Very little.
Yeah. And I imagine it's less interesting.
It's less interesting.
Yeah.
People come in usually to us because they have a potential, and we're the agency they hire to make money.
We have probably a bunch more on this.
There's one there.
There's one right there, sorry.
I don't have a Twitter, so I thought I'd just walk up.
Well, good for you. I'm glad you got it.
Nice, the original social network.
Yep. I have a different type of question. I was wondering what you've done both academically and professionally to get where you are today, because I'm a communication studies major and a journalism minor. I've always planned on pursuing a public relations career. However, I'm really interested in advertising, and I really enjoyed your presentation. So just
Thank
wondering
you.
if you have any
Yes.
advice.
For me, it was I didn't have any hookups. I didn't come from my dad he was a race car driver and a construction worker. Mm-hmm. So I come from that. It's not like
that very small demographic of race car driving construction workers.
Yeah. He didn't know anyone at Ogilvy and Mather.
Right.
You know what I mean? So for me, I studied communications in college, but we did. Yeah, so I think what you're studying is good, but I will also say that if you're not studying communications and journalism, you're still okay, because I honestly believe that whatever you study, if you study something that you love, to round you out as a person, that's going to make you more employable probably anywhere unless it's a highly prescriptive thing that you're going in for. Mm-hmm. But advertising is pretty loose. Mm-hmm. We get people, from all walks of life. I always say it's the last bastion of the unemployable, because the backgrounds of people have a zero commonality to them. But that's a legit background that it's a common one to get into advertising with, or potentially into the PR thing. I will say this though, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where you went to school, it doesn't matter how hard you studied, it doesn't matter what your GPA is, it's still going to require a massive slice of humble pie when you get out of school. And you're going to have to focus obsessively on what you want and just keep grinding at it. It's a grind. For me, it was a super painful process. It took about 1.5 years for me to break into an ad agency. I walked into J. Walter Thompson in Toronto, and I said, what do I have to do to get a job here? And these two gorgeous gorgeous outside, gorgeous inside women, Marcy Ruby and Shelley Ambrose, they said, well, you have to make a portfolio. I said, can you show me what one looks like? And they kind of snickered a bit, but then they realized I was serious. And so they showed me what a portfolio looked like, and I said, I'll see you in 2 weeks, like an arrogant little shit that I was. And it turned out it was like 4 months to make a portfolio, which was spec ads, basically. Print ads that I did an exercise where I took an ad that I thought was shitty, and then I made it good, and brought that in. And they really helped me a lot, and they hooked up an interview with Ogilvy and Mather with 2 other women. All of my mentors getting into the business. I've picked up a few male mentors since, but
They were all women.
they were all women,
Yeah.
which is highly unusual. Janet Keston and Nancy Vonk, who famously did the Dove Real Beauty campaign. Marcy Ruby and Shelley Ambrose sent me to Janet and Nancy, and Janet and Nancy just, I don't know, they saw something endearing in me, because it certainly wasn't any appreciable skill. My portfolio sucked really bad. Anyway, so they introduced me to this dude, Mark Hiltout, South African dude, mustache, about 6'4", super intimidating to me. And he just literally went through my book like this one. He's like, crap. Oh my God, that's rubbish. Crap. And when he was done, he just said, thank you. And I'm like, okay, interview over, that's great. So I went down to Ogilvy and Mather's lobby, and I threw my portfolio in the garbage. And I was like, this isn't for me. This is like the 30th agency I've been to. It's just a nightmare. It's been a year and a half. You know, my dad's telling me to get a job, and I'm working construction in the summertime and whatever. It was not a good year and a half, and that was it. I was done. I threw my book in the garbage. I go home, and there's a light blinking on my answering machine. And, hey, it's Shane. Shane, it's Mark Hiltout. I'd like to offer you a job for the summer. And I'm like, oh, amazing. The biggest douchebag that I've ever met is the guy who offers me a job for the summer. And my girlfriend at the time, who had accompanied me to the interview and was waiting in the lobby, pulled my portfolio out of her purse.
Which she had rescued.
She rescued it from the trash.
Right.
Yeah, and she goes, I knew you could do it. You know, I still get emotional thinking about it, because it was that hard of a struggle. You got to be prepared for that. And then it turns out later that Mark Hiltout is an awesome guy. I think he still owes me $100 from a pool bet, because it was a pool table at Ogilvy. But he turned out to be.
We'll look into that. We'll get in touch with him.
Get in touch with him, see if he can flip me that Benji. But he turned out to be an amazing guy, and I worked closely with Janet and Nancy, and they really put me in the right path on my career.
That's a great answer. And by the way, you picked up on the one question I skipped, was really sort of how did you get your career started? So thank you for doing that. Also, I would add that for those of you who are interested in this sort of thing, taking at least one hands-on design class would not be a bad idea, because it's a way of thinking that you're not necessarily getting in your other areas, where you have to kind of synthesize things into a single whole at the end. You know, the ad at the end of the day looks like something. If it's a one-page ad in a magazine, you've had to make decisions about everything that go into it.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's really essential. Well, here, would you like to ask one? Sure.
Thank you for coming. First off, your job sounds pretty cool.
Thank you.
I have a question, though. After such a successful career in advertising, I guess starting over with your own company could be said to be a pretty daring decision. And I was wondering if you could talk about what would inspire you to do something like that.
Yeah.
Were you crazy? I mean, was that it?
Well, you know, I was scared that I might go crazy.
Right.
Because you certainly at some of the bigger multinational agencies, sometimes you just feel like you're just a tool that other people use to get what they want.
Right.
And sometimes you feel like you can't really affect meaningful change. And I missed a small environment. I missed that. But I also I was thinking, okay, well, what's my exit strategy? You know, am I just gonna, this is a business for young people. And as I get older, am I gonna be that like white-haired 65-year-old dude that they don't bring to meetings anymore? You know, that the first time there's a round of layoffs, my name's at the top of the list every time, and somehow I kind of muddle my way through? Is that what I wanna be?
Right.
So I kind of, at a certain point, had to try to fly on my own. I had to try to make it on my own, but it is daunting, and you do, I mean, you know, the question earlier was, you know, about resetting yourself and restarting. You could be a rock star. You know, I did I didn't write it, but I'll steal the line. Kevin Tenglin wrote it. Well, actually, no. I think most deaf actually wrote it for an ad that Kevin Tanglin, this kid who left Modernista, went on to do a lot of Apple commercials at Media Arts Lab. It was for Converse shoes, and it was about a basketball player who was suddenly entered the big leagues. And one line of that always resonated with me. College hero, at the show back to zero. Something to that effect. The idea is when you enter the big leagues, you're starting over. When you get to the NBA, all that shit you did in college doesn't matter. Same with when you leave college and you get into the ad scene, they don't care. It doesn't. I've worked with people who graduated Harvard, Stanford, Northeastern, with people that came from the, cleaning pools at the Institute for the Blind, which this particular guy, Brian Smith, told me was the easiest job he ever had because they couldn't tell if it was clean or dirty. But you start over. And when I was doing big things for the biggest brands in the world, and now I have this small agency and I'm getting small clients that fit the size of that agency, and it's frustrating because I'm starting over, and I don't want to start over. I want to continue the momentum from where I was, but I'm not Ogilvy and Mather. I'm not Leo Burnett. I'm not even Modernista, and you have to start over, and it's super hard, and it's scary as hell.
But it is, to be fair, this is a choice that is faced by people in creative industries all across the board, whether they're architects or advertising people or graphic designers, when you work for a giant firm, you get access to the giant projects without the autonomy, or you trade autonomy, which will be of greater value later in life. You are willing to accept that because at the end of the day, you don't want to be that 65-year-old white-haired dude, and as a 55-year-old dude, I take tremendous exception to that. I don't know if this will be white hair when it grows out. Thanks for the question. And Shane, thank you very much for coming.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.